The transport ships arrived exactly 1 week later, just as Warden Klex had promised. Zara watched from her cell window as 3 massive military vessels landed in the prison's main courtyard, their hulls scarred black from recent battles. Soldiers in combat armor began unloading equipment and setting up temporary holding areas. The entire prison felt different that morning. There was a tension in the air, a sense that something important was about to happen. Guards moved with more purpose, prisoners spoke in hushed whispers, and even the usual sounds of the facility seemed muted. During breakfast, Warden Klex made his final announcement about the transfer. All human prisoners will be moved to transport ship Gamma at 1400 hours. They are to be treated as enemy combatants from this point forward. Any prisoner attempting to interfere with this transfer will be shot. The message was clear and brutal. Marcus and the other humans were being condemned to torture and probably death, and anyone who tried to help them would face the same fate. Zara looked across the cafeteria to where Marcus sat with the other human prisoners. He was calmly eating his breakfast, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. Near the window, young Kip was crying silently, his reading tablet clutched against his chest like a security blanket. As the morning wore on, Zara found herself pacing her cell like a caged animal. Everything in her screamed that this was wrong. Marcus had committed no crime except being born human during a time of war. The other human prisoners were equally innocent soldiers who had been captured in battle and should have been treated according to galactic conventions, not shipped off to military interrogators. But what could she do? She was just one exiled princess in a prison full of dangerous criminals. Even if she wanted to help, she had no power, no resources, no allies, or did she? Over the past months, something unexpected had happened at Karo 7. Marcus's quiet acts of kindness had created ripples throughout the prisoner population. His reading classes had given hope to dozens of young inmates. His example of choosing compassion over violence had inspired others to question their own assumptions about strength and survival. Zara realized that she wasn't alone after all. She had allies, they just didn't know they were allies yet. During the midday exercise period, Zara began moving through the prison yard with deliberate purpose. She started with Kip, the young 10th boy who had become Marcus's most devoted student. "Kip," she said quietly, kneeling beside the boy who was still clutching his reading tablet. "What would Marcus want you to do right now?" The boy looked up with tear-filled eyes. "He would want me to be brave, to help others." "Then help me," Zara said simply. "Help me save him." Next, she approached Nala, an elderly Zephyrian woman who had been imprisoned for speaking out against her government's corruption. Marcus had spent hours teaching her granddaughter to read through video messages. "They're taking away the best teacher this place has ever seen," Zara told her. "Are we just going to let that happen? What can we do?" Nala asked, but there was fire in her ancient eyes. "We can show them what real strength looks like," Zara replied, one by one. Zara moved through the yard, speaking quietly to prisoners who had been touched by Marcus's kindness. The pattern was always the same. She didn't ask them to do anything specific. She just reminded them of what Marcus had done for them and asked if they thought it was right. By 1300 hours, word had spread through the prison like wildfire. Something was going to happen during the transfer. Nobody knew exactly what, but the anticipation was electric. At 1400 hours, the guards came for the human prisoners. Marcus walked calmly down the corridor, flanked by armed guards, his hands shackled behind his back. The other human prisoners followed in a similar formation. Their destination was the main courtyard, where a transport ship Gamma waited with its cargo holed open like the mouth of some mechanical beast. But as they reached the courtyard, something extraordinary happened. The other prisoners were supposed to be locked in their cells during the transfer. That was standard protocol. But somehow, dozens of inmates had managed to be in the courtyard at the same time. They lined both sides of the path from the main building to the transport ship, standing in complete silence. "What is this?" demanded Colonel Thrax, the military officer in charge of the transfer. "Why are these prisoners not secured?" Warden Klex looked confused and angry. "I gave specific orders," we volunteered for courtyard maintenance. interrupted Brutus, the massive Kraxon who had threatened Zara weeks earlier. Work detail. All voluntary. It was an obvious lie, but it was delivered with such conviction that the colonel hesitated. The security protocols for prisoner transfers hadn't anticipated this situation. As Marcus and the other humans walked down the path between the silent prisoners, something beautiful began to happen. One by one, the inmates began to applaud. It started with young Kip, clapping slowly and deliberately. Then Nala joined in. Then Brutus, his massive stone hands creating thunderous claps. Within moments, dozens of prisoners from a dozen different species were applauding, their faces solemn but determined. Silence! Colonel Thrax shouted. Guards, restore order! But the guards hesitated. They had weapons, but they were vastly outnumbered. And the prisoners weren't being violent or threatening. They were just clapping. Marcus stopped walking and looked around in amazement. His eyes found Zara in the crowd, and she could see the understanding dawn on his face. This wasn't just a random demonstration. This was a deliberate act of defiance, organized and coordinated. Keep moving, a guard shouted, prodding Marcus with his weapon, but now other things were happening. As the human prisoners passed each group of applauding inmates, small items were being tossed at their feet. Food rations, blankets, personal possessions that might provide some small comfort during the ordeal ahead. Stop this immediately! Colonel Thrax was screaming now, his face purple with rage. I want these prisoners returned to their cells? Warden Klex looked around at the hundreds of applauding prisoners and realized that he didn't have nearly enough guards to force them all back inside. More importantly, he was beginning to understand that something fundamental had shifted in his prison. These inmates weren't rioting or trying to escape. They were making a statement about honor and justice that was more powerful than any act of violence could be. As Marcus reached the transport ship, he turned back to face the assembled prisoners. The applause had grown to a thunderous roar that echoed off the canyon walls surrounding. Caro 7, even some of the guards had stopped trying to restore order and were simply watching in. Amazement! Marcus's eyes found Zara again, and he smiled. Not sadly, not with resignation, but with genuine joy. In that moment, Zara realized what they had accomplished. They hadn't saved Marcus from transfer. That had probably been impossible from the start. But they had shown him that his sacrifice had meaning. They had demonstrated that kindness creates ripples that spread far beyond the original act. Most importantly, they had proven that real strength wasn't about the power to destroy, but about the courage to stand up for what's right, even when you can't win. Load them up, Colonel Thrax finally ordered, his voice tight with fury. As the transport ship's cargo bay began to close, Marcus called out one final message. Remember what you learned? Teach others. The ship lifted off amid the continuing applause of hundreds of prisoners. As it disappeared into the red sky of Caro 7, the courtyard gradually fell silent. But the energy remained. Something had changed in the prison, something that couldn't be undone. Over the following weeks, the changes became more apparent. Prisoners who had never spoken to each other before began forming study groups. The reading classes continued, led by Nala and other inmates Marcus had taught. Acts of kindness became more common throughout the facility. Even more surprisingly, several of the Vulpine prisoners approached Zara to apologize for their earlier hostility. Vex, the one who had threatened her with a knife, was among them. I've been thinking about what you said, he admitted awkwardly. About strength and honor, maybe there's something to it. But the biggest change was in Zara herself. The demonstration in the courtyard had awakened something inside her that had been dormant since her exile. She was a leader, not because of her royal blood or her title, but because she understood something fundamental about inspiring others to be their best selves. 3 months after the transfer, Zara was summoned to Warden Klex's office. She had no idea what to expect, but she found the massive creature looking unusually thoughtful. Sit down, former princess, he said. Using the title without his usual mockery. Zara took the offered chair and waited. I've been running this prison for 15 years, Klex began slowly. I've seen every kind of prisoner you can imagine. Killers, thieves, rebels, political dissidents. But I've never seen anything like what happened during that transfer. He paused, studying her with his small but intelligent eyes. You organized that demonstration, didn't you? Zara met his gaze steadily. I reminded people of what Marcus had done for them. They chose how to respond. Klex was quiet for a long moment. Do you know why I became a prison warden? Zara shook her head. Because I believe that some beings were irredeemable. That the only way to deal with criminals was to lock them away and throw away the key. He gestured Aro. 3 weeks after the cafeteria incident, Zara found herself sitting in the prison yard's shadow, watching Marcus teach a group of younger prisoners how to read. It was an unusual sight in Caro 7, where education was seen as pointless luxury. But somehow the human had convinced Warden Klex to allow it. The key to understanding any language, Marcus was explaining to a young Tenthry refugee, is to start with the patterns. See how these symbols connect? They tell a story. Zara marveled at his patience. The Tenthry boy had been arrested for stealing food for his siblings and could barely speak Galactic Standard, let alone read it. Most beings would have given up trying to teach him, but Marcus spent hours each day working with the struggling students. Princess Zara? The Tenthry boy noticed her watching and waved excitedly. Look, I can read my name now. Despite her protests, the younger prisoners had started calling her princess again. Not in mockery like the guards did, but with genuine respect. Word of Marcus's speech in the cafeteria had spread throughout the prison, and many of the inmates had begun to see her exile not as evidence of weakness, but as proof of moral courage. That's wonderful, Kip, Zara said, genuinely pleased. Your sisters will be so proud when you write to them. The boy beamed and returned to his lesson. Marcus caught Zara's eye and smiled before continuing his instruction. Over the past weeks, they had developed an easy friendship despite the obvious risks. Being seen as friendly with a human could make Zara even more of a target among certain prisoner factions, but she was beginning to realize that she cared less and less about the opinions of criminals and outcasts. For the first time in her life, she felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. That afternoon brought news that shattered the relative peace of Caro 7 during shift change. Warden Klex gathered all the prisoners in the main assembly hall, his expression grimmer than usual. I've received word from the Galactic Council, he announced, his voice echoing off the stone walls. War has been officially declared between the Vulpine Empire and the Human Federation. All human prisoners are now to be considered enemy combatants under the war articles. A cold silence fell over the assembly. Zara felt her stomach drop as she realized what this meant. Marcus and the handful of other human prisoners would now be subject to much harsher treatment. Possibly even execution if the war escalated further. She glanced over at Marcus, who stood perfectly still among the other prisoners, his face carefully neutral. But she could see the fear in his eyes, not for himself, but for the young prisoners he had been teaching. Who would help them learn to read now? Who would share their food rations with the weaker inmates? Furthermore, Warden Klex continued, any prisoner found associating with enemy combatants will be considered a collaborator and punished accordingly. That includes sharing resources, communicating, or providing any form of assistance. The message was clear. Anyone who helped the humans would face severe consequences. As the prisoners were dismissed back to their cells, Zara watched Marcus being led away by a squad of guards. He didn't look back at her, but she saw his shoulders tense with resignation. That night, Zara lay awake listening to the sounds of the prison. Somewhere in the distance, she could hear sobbing, probably young Kip, crying for his teacher who had been taken away. The injustice of it burned in her chest like acid. Marcus was not her enemy. The humans who had been captured during the border skirmishes were not her enemies either. They were soldiers, yes, but they were also people with families, hopes, and dreams. They deserved better than to be treated as disposable objects in a political game. By morning, Zara had made her decision. The human prisoners had been moved to a separate wing of the prison, one with enhanced security and limited privileges. Visiting them would be nearly impossible for a regular prisoner. But Zara was not a regular prisoner. She was a former princess, who knew how prison bureaucracies worked. She spent the day carefully observing the guard rotations, noting which security cameras had blind spots, and identifying the access routes to the restricted wing. It was dangerous, but not impossible. That night after the evening meal, Zara put her plan into action. She had noticed that Guard Sergeant Voss, a lazy Boltherian, often fell asleep during his night shift. His post controlled access to the restricted wing, and his security station was positioned in a way that created a blind spot near the access door. Moving quietly through the shadows, Zara made her way to the restricted wing. The door was locked, but she had learned to pick simple locks during her royal training, a skill her tutors had called useful for understanding security vulnerabilities. She had never imagined she would use it to break into a prison wing. The human prisoners were housed in a section that looked identical to the regular cells, but the atmosphere was different, heavier, more desperate. She found Marcus in the third cell, sitting on his bed with his head in his hands. "Marcus," she whispered through the door slot. He looked up in surprise, then quickly moved to the door. "Zara, what are you doing here?" "If they catch you—" "I don't care," she said firmly. "This is wrong. You're not my enemy." Marcus smiled sadly. "The galaxy doesn't see it that way. My people and your people are at war now. Officially, I'm supposed to hate you. Do you?" Zara asked. "Of course not. But that doesn't matter to the politicians and generals making these decisions." Zara reached through the food slot and grasped his hand. "It matters to me. And it matters to Kip and all the other prisoners you've been helping. You've shown more kindness in this place than most people show in a lifetime." "Zara," Marcus said gently, "you need to go. If they find you here, they'll put you in solitary confinement. Or worse." "Not yet," Zara insisted. "I need to ask you something. Back on my homeworld, they said I was weak because I tried to save human prisoners. They said a true leader would have ordered their execution without hesitation." She paused, gathering her courage. "Do you really believe what you said in the cafeteria? That choosing mercy is a sign of strength?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "You want to know what I think real strength looks like?" he finally said. "It looks like a princess giving up her throne rather than compromise her principles. It looks like someone risking solitary confinement to comfort a friend. It looks like choosing to do what's right even when everyone tells you you're wrong. But what if I really am wrong?" Zara asked, voicing the doubt that had been eating at her for months. "What if my father was right? What if the only way to protect my people is through strength and violence?" "Then why are you here?" Marcus asked gently. "Why did you come to check on enemy combatants instead of staying safe in your cell?" Zara thought about this for a moment. Because I couldn't stand the thought of you suffering alone. Because it felt wrong to abandon someone who had shown me kindness." "And there's your answer," Marcus said. "That feeling in your chest, that sense of right and wrong that compelled you to risk everything to help others? That's not weakness, Zara. That's the most powerful force in the universe." Footsteps echoed in the distance, growing closer. Marcus squeezed her hand through the slot. "Go now, and Zara. Thank you for coming here, for seeing me as a person instead of an enemy." Zara quickly made her way back through the prison corridors, her heart pounding with more than just fear of being caught. Marcus's words had stirred something deep inside her, a sense of purpose that felt stronger and clearer than anything she had experienced as a princess. The next morning brought shocking news. During breakfast, Warden Klex announced that the war between the Vulpine Empire and Human Federation had escalated. A major battle had been fought near the Centauri system, with heavy casualties on both sides. "As a result," the warden declared, "we have received orders to transfer all human prisoners to a military detention facility for enhanced interrogation. Transport ships will arrive within the week." Zara felt the blood drain from her face. Enhanced interrogation was a polite term for torture. Marcus and the other humans were going to be handed over to military interrogators who would break them for whatever information they might possess. Around the cafeteria, reactions varied. Some prisoners looked indifferent. The fate of humans was not their concern. Others, particularly those who had been part of Marcus's reading classes, looked stricken. Young Kip was openly crying, but it was the reaction of the Vulpine prisoners that surprised Zara most. They were smiling, grinning even. To them, this was justice. The weak human sympathizer getting his due. Looks like your pet human won't be around much longer. Exile, sneered Vex, one of the Vulpine prisoners who had been particularly vocal about Zara's disgrace. Maybe now you'll learn what real strength looks like. Something snapped inside Zara. She stood up from her table, her chair scraping loudly against the stone floor. You want to know what real strength looks like? She said, her voice carrying clearly. Through the suddenly quiet cafeteria, all eyes turned to her. Guards shifted nervously, hands moving toward their weapons. This was exactly the kind of confrontation that led to violence. Real strength, Zara continued, her voice growing stronger with each word, is not about who you can hurt. It's about who you choose to protect. It's about standing up for what's right even when everyone tells you you're wrong. She looked directly at Vexen. Princess Zara pressed her face against the cold metal of the prison transport ship's window, watching her homeworld of Vulperia shrink into a distant orange dot among the stars. The heavy chains around her wrists clinked softly as she shifted, the sound echoing through the empty cargo hold that had become her prison cell. Weak, her father's final words still burned in her memory. You are too weak to lead our people. Too soft? Too ... Human-like in your thinking. The Vulpine Emperor had spat those last words like they tasted bitter in his mouth. Zara's fox-like ears drooped against her silver hair as she remembered the trial. The Council of Elders had agreed with her father's judgment. She had refused to order the execution of captured human prisoners during the recent border skirmish. Instead, she had suggested negotiations, prisoner exchanges, and peaceful solutions. To the warrior culture of the Vulpine Empire, this was seen as the ultimate weakness. The transport ship shuddered as it dropped out of hyperspace near the prison planet. Caro 7, through the window, Zara could see the barren, rocky world that would be her new home. No grass, no trees, just endless gray stone and the harsh red light of a dying star. This was where the Empire sent its failures, its criminals, and apparently, its weak princesses. Captain Grix, the reptilian ship commander, slithered into the cargo hold with 2 guards. Time to go, your former highness, he hissed, his forked tongue flicking out mockingly. Hope you're ready for your new life as a common prisoner. The guards roughly grabbed Zara's arms and hauled her to her feet. Her legs felt weak after days of being chained in the same position, but she forced herself to stand straight. Even in exile, she would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. The landing bay of Caro 7 was as unwelcoming as the planet looked from space. The air tasted metallic and thin, and the artificial gravity felt wrong somehow, too light and unstable. Zara stumbled as they pushed her down the ship's ramp, her chains making it difficult to balance. Warden Klex was waiting for her, a massive creature that looked like a cross between a bear and a rhinoceros. His small eyes studied her with obvious disappointment. So this is the famous weak princess, he rumbled. You don't look like much. Block C, Cell 47, try not to die on your first day. The prison facility was a maze of gray corridors carved directly into the mountain rock. Other prisoners pressed against their cell bars as Zara was led past, some calling out crude remarks, others simply staring. She had expected this. On Caro 7, former royalty would be seen as either a valuable target or entertainment. Cell 47 was exactly what she had imagined. A small box with a hard metal bed, a tiny sink, and a toilet. The only window was a narrow slit that showed nothing but rock wall. As the guards locked her inside and removed her chains, Zara felt the full weight of her situation settle on her shoulders. Welcome to your new palace, one of the guards laughed before walking away. Zara sat on the hard bed and tried not to cry. Everything she had known, everything she had been, was gone. Her title, her family, her future as a leader of her people, all stripped away. Because she had chosen compassion over cruelty, hours passed before she heard footsteps in the corridor again. The sound was different from the heavy boots of the guards. Lighter, more careful. A food tray slid through the slot in her door, followed by a quiet voice. "You're the Vulpine princess, right?" Zara looked up to see a human face peering through the small window in her door. The human appeared young, maybe in his 20s, with brown hair and surprisingly kind eyes. This was unusual. Humans were rare in this part of the galaxy, and even rarer in Vulpine prisons. "Former princess," Zara corrected, her voice hoarse from not speaking for hours. "I'm nobody now." The human smiled slightly. "I'm Marcus Chung, Cell 45. Been here about 6 months now." He paused, glancing around the corridor. "Look, I know you probably don't trust humans, given the war and all, but I wanted to say, what you did during the border conflict, trying to save those prisoners, that took real courage." Zara stared at him in surprise. "How do you know about that?" "Word travels, even to places like this. Some of us humans who got captured. We heard about a Vulpine princess who tried to stop the executions. We heard about how your own people called you weak for it." Marcus's expression grew serious. "But we know the truth. What you did wasn't weak. It was the strongest thing anyone could do." Before Zara could respond, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed down the corridor. Marcus quickly moved away from her door. "Gotta go. Guards coming." "But hey, princes or not, you're not alone here." The next few days blurred together in a routine of terrible food, uncomfortable sleep, and the constant noise of the prison. Zara kept to herself mostly, trying to understand the complex social structure that existed among the prisoners. Different species formed different groups, and everyone seemed to have their place in the hierarchy. The Vulpine prisoners, about a dozen of them, made it clear that Zara was not welcome among them. They saw her exile as proof of her weakness and treated her with open contempt. The other alien species largely ignored her, seeing her as just another fallen noble with no power left. But Marcus was different. Despite the risk of being seen talking to a Vulpine, he made small gestures of kindness. He shared his slightly better food rations with her. He warned her about which guards were more violent than others. He even managed to get her an extra blanket when the nights grew cold. "Why are you helping me?" Zara asked him one day during exercise time in the prison yard. They were walking separately but close enough to talk quietly. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, watching the other prisoners lift weights or run laps around the small yard. "My grandmother always told me that strength isn't about how hard you can hit someone. It's about how willing you are to protect someone else, even when it costs you everything." "Your grandmother sounds wise," Zara replied, genuinely curious about human culture for the first time. She was a refugee from Earth's third global war, saved dozens of children during the bombing of Neo-Singapore, even though it meant she couldn't escape herself. She was captured and spent years in a prison camp. Marcus smiled sadly. "When I heard about what you did, refusing to execute prisoners even though it cost you your crown, it reminded me of her." Zara felt something warm in her chest that she hadn't felt since her exile began. Someone understood. Someone saw her choice not as weakness but as strength. That night, lying on her hard bed, Zara began to think about her future differently. Maybe being exiled from the Vulpine Empire wasn't the end of her story. Maybe it was the beginning of something else entirely. She thought about Marcus's grandmother, saving children while bombs fell around her. She thought about the human prisoners she had tried to save, and how their families might never know what happened to them. She thought about all the beings in this prison who had been thrown away by their societies. Forgotten and abandoned. For the first time since her trial, Princess Zara, former Princess Zara, felt a spark of purpose ignite inside her chest. The next morning brought trouble in a way she hadn't expected. During breakfast in the common area, a massive Kraxan prisoner named Brutus approached her table. Kraxans were known throughout the galaxy for their incredible strength and short tempers. Brutus was nearly 3 meters tall, with rock-like skin and glowing red eyes. "Little fox princess," he growled, his voice like grinding stone. I hear you're supposed to be royalty, but you look pretty weak to me. The entire cafeteria went quiet. Even the guards stopped moving, eager to see what would happen. This was the kind of entertainment that broke up the monotony of prison life. Zara looked up at Brutus calmly, though her heart was racing. I'm not a princess anymore. Just another prisoner like you. No, Brutus smiled, showing rows of sharp teeth. You're not like me. You're weak, soft. Your own people threw you away because you couldn't do what needed to be done. He leaned closer, his hot breath washing over her. Maybe I should show you what real strength looks like. The threat was clear. In prison culture, backing down from this challenge would mark Zara as an easy target for every predator in the facility. But fighting Brutus would likely end with her in the medical bay. If she was lucky, before she could respond, Marcus appeared at her table, carrying his breakfast tray. Morning, Zara. Mind if I sit here? Brutus straightened up, his glowing eyes focusing on the human. This doesn't concern you, meatbag. Marcus set down his tray and smiled pleasantly, though Zara could see the tension in his muscles. Actually, it does. See, Brutus, I've been watching you for months now. Big guy, loves to pick on smaller prisoners, especially the new ones. Real impressive stuff. The Kraxen's rock-like face twisted with anger. You want to die today, human? Not really, Marcus replied, still smiling. But here's the thing you might not know about Princess Zara here. She's not weak. She's probably the strongest person in this entire prison. Brutus laughed, a sound like boulders tumbling down a mountain. Her? She couldn't hurt a fly. You're right, Marcus agreed. She probably couldn't hurt a fly. But that's not what makes her strong. You want to know what real strength looks like, Brutus? Real strength is choosing not to hurt someone when you have the power to destroy them. The entire cafeteria was listening now, prisoners from every species drawn in by the confrontation. Marcus continued,